So I'm happy to introduce Kathy Lucero from Clallam County Noxious Weed Control Board, and she is going to speak to us today about weed-free rock resources. I had to practice that. A pragmatic approach to prevention and certification. So thank you so much for joining us, Kathy, and take it away.
So are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So sorry I don't have a webcam. I did try to make that happen today, but it didn't work. But instead, we're just going to go with the same thing Rod had to do, but I won't be as practiced and written out. So we all know about the, let's see if that goes. There we go. All about all these impacts that Scotch broom has had on our landscapes, whether it's a forest. Boy, that was a eye-opening from Cheryl's talk. Pasture, wildland, or even restoration sites. And there are lots of successful control methods, but on some scale, the sheer problem is staggering. And while we have to address these current problems, we'll never get ahead without simultaneously preventing these future infestations. And so that's why I'm going to talk about weed-free rock sources. So Scotch broom is obviously a threat to, I'm trying to collapse this thing, our natural resources. But one of the primary vectors, and we've seen this over and over again, is contaminated rock and equipment. And in Clallam County, even though broom is just a Class B, not regulated for control, our weed board has selected it for control in and around rock sources because we feel that that is a great way to prevent it from being worse, and it is a containable and feasible approach. But how people respond to the variety of why is this going forward? Let's see what happens. Okay, so the response, though, of different entities really depends a lot on how they feel the impact and whether they're going to allocate resources to doing something about it. And I kind of have, I talked about this at the last symposium, that when are they prompted to do something about it, their control threshold, how much are they willing to tolerate because they don't feel an impact. And at the very high tolerance, like really not a big deal, is someplace like the right-of-way and, as Cheryl described, utilities, because they like the broom on some level. It keeps other things out, it's not a tree, and it just grows all on its own, and they could just mow it back when they feel like it. So their willingness to spend money on it is pretty low. It has to be a really low cost. But if you move to something like a commercial forest, where they're going to really carefully balance how much are they willing to spend depending on what benefit they're getting. And again, Cheryl's talk was pretty eye-opening. So I would call them a moderate tolerance for the broom because they're going to make sure they're maximizing their benefit. But then you get into an entity like the DNR that has both commercial and conservation goals, and they're going to be moderately tolerant to low tolerance when it's in their wildlands or things where they're trying to preserve ESA listed species. So they're a little bit different. And then you get to the conservation groups or the restoration groups that are trying to restore sites back to another condition, sans invasives. And their tolerance is really low. They want every last one gone. And they're willing to spend quite a bit of money to do that. But if you look at all those different responses, one thing that you're going to see as a common denominator is prevention does suit all. So while we've talked about a lot of different control options, I'm going to talk a little bit about the prevention one. So what are the goals of a certification program? And you'll see it said that it's to prevent the spread of invasive weeds. And is prevention actually really possible? You can't completely prevent these weeds from spreading, but really what we're doing is managing risk. And so we're looking to create a straightforward method for managing weeds in quarries because they are a primary vector. Once you move these contaminated soils or materials out into the landscape, it is really hard to claw them back. We want to help the quarry operators develop and update their weed management plans, and we want there to be this steady source of weed-free rock for the land managers. They have the need, but we have to make sure that there is a material available to them. And you'd be surprised at how important this can be to the quarry operators, and we'll talk about the categories that can receive, but it's really an incentive and a recognition of those that are practicing good weed management. So what is weed-free certification? And really, as I said before, it's about reduced risk. It doesn't mean that it's free of all weeds. That's a misnomer on some level. It really means that it's free of high priority, and in our state, noxious weeds, and sometimes other undesirable plants. So for me, for the county, it's going to be all the Class A, the B designates, and the B and C selects. And sometimes there's others. And in this program, I can ask for others that maybe are toxic, that aren't on the list. Say, for example, bittersweet nightshade or something like that that I see show up. It's not on the list anymore, but it's not a desirable species to be spread around. Who gets to decide which weeds are a priority? Well, at the minimum, we're going to require what the state requires or the specific county list. But that doesn't mean that a federal agency might have other priority species that they don't want to see. And that's a little confusing sometimes for the rock owners. And who can provide this certification? Well, certainly any entity that's asking for it can go out and inspect themselves. Weed boards can do it. Sometimes conservation districts do it. It just depends on who is willing to do it. But what it really requires is skilled plant ID. You need to know what those things are sometimes when they're small. And it has to be coupled with how those things can be controlled, because you can't craft a feasible plan for controlling those things or make it a reasonable plan if you don't know how to do that based on the biology of the plant that you're working with. So who ends up actually doing it in Washington? Most of the time, it's the weed boards, and there's some good reasons for that. I did canvass, put out a call to all the coordinators in Washington State and asked them if they're providing this service and if they charge. And it seems like most weed boards are willing to. I didn't hear a lot from Eastern weed boards, but most of the websites said that they can and will do it. Now, sometimes folks have asked, why isn't there just a standard that we all know what to do every time? And there is an organization called the North American Invasive Species Management Association, and they have established a protocol. And that could be extremely helpful, but I'll point out why we're not really using that here. On the plus side, this national standard provides this continuity between both Canada and United States. So if you had some rock source that needed to cross boundaries or between states, it's consistent, it's knowable, and that's great. There is a fee to be a member, so immediately there's some kind of cost to be able to be certified under their standards and to proceed. The interesting thing is that the membership of this organization votes for the plants that have to be on the minimum on the weed list. And interestingly, we ran into this problem a bit with the weed-free certification for straw and hay. They have oxeye daisy on this list for gravel mining rock sources. In Western Washington, that is an absolute impossible standard to meet. There's always oxeye daisy, even in these highly mineralized soils, bare ground. It's almost always there, and it's very widespread. And then they'll add the state or province weed list. Now, in our state, we have a giant list, and it's more about preventative, and we add a plant to a list, and we put it into a control threshold. It's prioritized. It's not every species are going to be regulated or require control. So, unfortunately, NISMA's standard and protocol is too much for the way it works in Washington State, and that's pretty much why we don't use it. So how does this process work as I know it and how I do it? So to begin with, you have to have at the center awareness of the problem and an interest in doing something about it. And it starts with these 4 components, and they're all pretty much equally important. To start with, let's just start with the agency and the user who's asking for that material. They are fantastically setting this policy or contract standards that require the use of weed-free. And I will say in Washington, it was the Forest Service that broke ground on that, just saying you have to. And then you start getting calls, how do I get it? I think it's really important that there's cross-department communication and that we're clear between departments. For example, I've had been doing a lot of work with the DNR, and between their silviculturists and their regular road guys, not always good communication about how that's going to work. So even the Forest Service, the road guys approve something and the botanist says, wait a second, why did you do that? So it's important in a big agency that everybody's talking to each other, that this is integrated fully into that organization. And you need to identify who's going to be responsible for following all the way through. And then there's the contractor. It's usually these standards are put into a contract, and that contractor has got to go out and find where that clean material is going to come from when they're making their bid. And it's great that they ask for certification, because that prompts the rock owner to call me and say, how can I get it, or what is that? That would be early days. But it's really, really important to keep in mind that they need predictability. They need to know what's going to be expected. They need to know how it works. They need to be able to incorporate this weed control thing that's kind of new to them and doesn't, it's hard for them to register plants when they're all about hardscapes on a lot of levels. And once you've got that piece in there, they need a commitment to continue to get the certification completed. And it's not just a one-year thing, it's an ongoing thing. But the biggest burden lies on the entity or the person doing that certification. Our role is to solve the problem. Our role is not to say no. Our role is to figure out how to make it work. And that means we need a lot of botanical knowledge, and we need a lot of innovative ways to make that control happen. We have to be responsive. You can't get a request and say, I'll be out in a month. They probably need it a lot sooner than that. And the program or entity that's doing it needs the sufficient resources to commit to doing this process. It takes a lot of our time. You need a knowledge of how rock sources work, and I'll explain about that a little bit more. But one of the most important pieces that happens and is really critical for this working is a large measure of trust between the certifying entity and the rock owner, that you can create a relationship that's going to work. And I've been more than pleased to see how that ends up working. We're not seen as the, well, excuse my French, the asshole. We're seen as the asset when we come out to that and help them figure out how they're going to make this work. So what does an inspection involve? Well, first, you got to call in advance. Sometimes I get this call, can you come out tomorrow because we need the rock? It's like, well, give me a minute. Or sometimes they'll call in January because the contractor is just starting to do the bid and they're asking for the certification, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just going to say we can't come if it's not the growing season. We're not going to come out in the middle of winter and certify something. It's going to include a look at all the piles. So the material that's going to be moved, it's absolutely critical that that is clean. And we're going to look all that over with a fine-tooth comb. We need to look at the processing area. Where are you storing it? The crusher, how is that working? How are you getting this material in and out? Where do the trucks line up? Where do they go? Do you wash it? Just how is it working? How they enter and leave and how they move around through the pit is really important, because they can either pick up seeds or bring things to you just through that transportation corridor within the site itself. And I always walk the entire boundary, every foot of it, because it's amazing to me what you find off in some far corner where an adjoining property is contaminating your pit. So this is just kind of an example of, actually I just pretty much took these pictures within the last week. I've been out doing inspections. So there's that pathway. These guys are so into this work that they cleared, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, they cleared all the broom from the entrance and across the street and all along there. They wanted it perfect. They take a lot of pride in their pit. The piles, as you can see, they are pristine. There is nothing. There's no green. I'm clear that there's nothing on them. And you can see the processing is all, again, very clear of any kind of weeds. The perimeter, that's a super important one, and it's where you're going to see the weed pressure. And this particular pit owner has chosen to have these really high berms, so it kind of separates from different land uses that might be adjacent. So again, we're really managing the risk. We're reducing the potential for spread. And some things that I need to know about, or I'm going to use in my calculation of what's best for this pit. Is it active or is it sometimes dormant? And what I mean by that is a commercial pit or a private pit, they are pumping out material constantly. One I went to just yesterday, they put out 100,000 ton every year. And compared to something like a Forest Service pit where sometimes they use it and sometimes they don't. And the problems that can accumulate in a dormant pit are different than an active pit. If it's gated or it's not gated. If it's gated, it means that you're less likely to have somebody dumping in there. Open access, even some of the DNR, they have a gate, but it's often open because they're letting people go in and out. So that does lead to a lot of illegal dumping. How are you using that pit? Is it just for production and storage of that material till a project takes it away, or are you adding spoils to that mix? And I'm going to tell you, I've seen over and over again, big piles of spoils that are contaminated, put right next to this really valuable crushed material and having it contaminated. In one of our county pits, they had accumulated a lot of poison hemlock on their sand, and just as somebody else mentioned, Mount Rainier got stuff spread out for road maintenance. They spread it all over the county from this one particular pile, and we chased after it. Where exactly will that material be processed? Is it in a clean face? What's the overburden on it? And then where is it going to be stored? Is that storage area clean as well? How long does it sit there? Are we going to be seeing it when it's got alders growing on it because it's been sitting there for 3 or 4 years? Much less likely to be able to be certified. And where are you going next? I always ask, how long is this pit going to be in operation? How much more material do you have? Which direction are you going to go next? Because I can look there and foresee problems that they might be able to take care of in advance. So this is a very busy screen, but I'm kind of just showing you some of the language that's actually in the forms that we fill out and the reports that we give. And it kind of gives a description of how you're going to get categorized, what level of certification you're going to achieve. And if you can see on the left-hand side, there's option A, B, C, and D. Option A and B are green because they are great. Option A means that the plants are rare to absent, and it's almost impossible to achieve this category for any length of time just because plants continue to come back in. Usually it's just been open, or they're just really doing a really bang-up job on their weed control. It doesn't always last, and you have to keep looking. But option B is really the one that I'd like to see most pits achieve, and it means that the invasive plants are uncommon and easily isolated. And you'll see language in here that says priority 1. This is straight out of a Forest Service protocols that we use, and now we've applied to, just our county certification. And they have a whole list of plants, and they put them into categories of 1, 2, and will tolerate them. Those are those widespread weeds. And so again, a category B is that there's not many bad things in it. Maybe there's some of these widespread weeds, but they're easily isolated. And here's the key piece. Use of the materials from this source as found on the day of inspection would most likely not contribute to the spread of invasive plants. It doesn't say it won't, it just says it most likely will not. And that's as best we can probably do with this program. Now, an option C means, here's what it says, will be only used if no other source is available. And this means there's going to be mitigation of some level, like you got it off the face is clean, it's crushed, and now it goes straight into the truck. And we ran into some of these circumstances when they needed rip-wrap after there'd been a blowout of the river and the road was collapsing, and they needed it from a pit that we said not okay for a number of reasons. But they were going to take it from rip-wrap and load them straight into the truck, and it was clear that those things were clean. That's not something you want to stay in very long, but mitigation, it's a possibility. And option D is a fail. And I don't even write those up. I just usually tell people, you don't want me to write this up. Let's just figure out what you need to do to get to one of these other options and go from there. You don't want to fail. So what's in the report that we provide? All sorts of information about the quarry, how you get there, how big is it, kind of where the boundary is, who are we working with, what's the contact information, who we are, how you contact us, and we clearly talk about the treatment and management priorities. That's on the very front page. Here's what you need to do. And again, it's the piles, the perimeter, and the pathway, and what needs to happen in those kind of components of the report. The pit history is really important to us. Say, I am hit by a bus tomorrow, and nobody knows what happened in these pits before. So we try and keep track of, have we been there before? What do we know about this pit? How did it function in the past? What are they doing with it now? That's a little piece of information that's really helpful for us and for an agency that may be getting material from here. So we then give control recommendations by each species down to what herbicide we think they should be using and when they should be doing it. We tell them the category of certification they've achieved, and there's accompanying map and pictures and commentary about the things we saw that back up what we're telling them to do. There's also a really giant species list, and I tell people that it's going to be there, not to worry. We will clearly tell them which weeds we're worried about, but because I have a variety of entities that might want this material, they need to know some other things that I would think, it's everywhere, I'm not worried about it, but they may. For example, the National Park Service often uses our surveys and inspections to inform whether that's okay for them rather than go out themselves. Pretty costly for them to do, and they don't want to. So for example, oxeye daisy again, which is super common here, but there are certain areas that it's not, and the park generally is a more pristine environment, and they'd like to know if we even saw it there, that may be something of concern for them. And we're going to give them recommendations on, okay, you're good for right now, but we see this problem coming. Here's what you can do. So it's a pretty comprehensive report. And I know that this seems like, oh my gosh, this is just too expensive. That's why lots haven't done it, or they delay the cost until it's important enough to them. But our inspections and our reports are free, and we can only do this because the Forest Service for a long time has recognized that they needed a place to find these materials that were going to be clean, and there needed to be a method by which it could be achieved. And our county road department also is purchasing rock for many projects. We no longer have that many resources of our own. So they're funding these inspections because they see the value in getting these things clean and preventing it from being a problem right off the bat. And I'll say that initial treatments, if they've been let to go, really can be costly. I get that. I've been to over 70 pits in our area, and right now we are our program is managing 21 or 22 just for the county, and maybe another dozen to 20 for the Forest Service. So I know just how hard this can be. But it isn't that big a deal once you achieve just a maintenance level. If you look at it every year and you strategically figure out what needs to happen, and you consistently do it. And it really helps if production and storage are completely separated from the spoils. Have a different entrance, or make sure the piles are not right next to each other. And our road department has really made a huge effort to kind of rearrange how they're using some of those areas. Access is restricted. It's really helpful if it is closed off from getting illegal dumping, because I'm going to tell you, it's amazing what shows up in those piles. So we hear a lot of, but this is just really holding us up. I need it right now. And I'm going to say there is always a solution to that problem, because I've yet to be in a pit that doesn't have access to big equipment. So scrape off the part that's a problem that you're going to be digging, and put that to a side and make sure you can isolate it. That can be done immediately, and it's going to have to be done anyway to clear off an overburden to get down to the rock resource that you want. You need to make sure that you can create a clean processing location and a place, if you're going to store it clear that spot too. That can be right now. But that's probably going to be only a category C, and I don't want to see any pit stay in a category C for any length of time. It's not really worth my effort if we're not building a better program. There's lots of ways to do that maintenance. Ms. Toth was talking about, I think, the waving wand method. And I've seen these guys do it. It is astonishing to me how much ground they can cover and how fast. Certainly you need backpack sprayers because a lot of times it's not in an easy to get to place. If you were relying on simply some kind of ground boom and all you're doing is the floor of the pit, believe me, that's never going to be it. And this looks like a really awesome unit. I'd love to have one. But there's a lot of different obstacles between maintaining these things and keeping them in a state of ready between a private pit and some of these agency pits. For example, private is going to have this high volume, and this weed control gets built into their model, and they're going to buy the equipment that's necessary to make it easy and quick and inexpensive. On the other hand, there's multiple expectations. It can be confusing to them, that list of species that they're expected to, depending on who's going to be buying that rock. So I always ask that question too. And generally, they're just doing production and maybe some storage temporarily, but that stuff moves out very quickly. They can afford to keep it bare ground. It makes sense. But for the other agencies, that's not the case. Really low volume, they often sit for a long time between uses, and it's really hard to get the money to do weed control. It's often attached to the project that they're going to do, and that doesn't always really work out very well. And often those are multiple use sites where they're dumping storm damage in there, and then they pick up all sorts of other junk like broom or knotweed or something else, spoils, or the temporary storage that really hasn't been well thought through. So they have a lot of different obstacles to overcome. What's failure look like? Well, it's generally just this inconsistency and a lack of long-term commitment. And I'm going to give you an example of a DNR pit in our very, very far west end of the peninsula. And they had already put to bed. They thought they were done with this piece, and they planted all sorts of conifers. You can barely see them. They're little tiny 1-footers that are looking really crappy. And you can see a lot of trees around that aren't impacted by broom, and they've grown very tall in the time, probably 20 years that this was sitting there. And the broom, we had a correctional crew come in because they wanted this pit cleaned up. And we uncovered all the conifers that had been planted. And here's another picture of this area. Here's one of the crew. They made these gargantuan piles and they uncovered all these trees that had been completely stunted and were never going to grow out of the broom. Well, years passed, and then we ran out of money to have those crews do that work for them. And here's that same pit in 2017. Looks pretty much like it did before. But they have started to get involved with this program with us, and they have started to clean up. And this is that area now in 2020. We were just out there, gosh, about 3 weeks ago, and it's all been cleaned up, and they've spent a great deal of money to do that, and we're hoping that that continues. So why is this program working for us?
Well, 2 minutes.
All right, perfect. The agencies are creating the demand that drives this process. We are responsive and reliable. We're not for profit. We make these feasible. We're trying to make it work, customizable. And it's best accomplished by this neutral third party like a weed board that has the big picture in mind. We're trying to see all perspectives, and we have a long memory. I've been to many places, and I remember them very well. And we have the authority to enforce compliance if it serves as broad public interest, and nobody else has that ability. And we're really good at establishing working relationships that are going to achieve good results. It's not perfect, but it's a process. So every time I go into a pit, I have no clue what I'm going to find. It's amazing how they change from year to year. And this is when we were just out actually a couple of days ago, and there was a set of geese out there. And I was a little surprised. Last one was a flock of roosters. So you never know what you're going to find out there, not just animals, but the plants that are going to show up. And as always, our goal is to get to yes. We are not here to say no. We're trying to figure out how to make it work. But so this is a DNR worker, Matt, and we went out to see these pits, and he'd done a great job before, but we were starting to get some regrowth, but they'd worked so hard at it that it was like, let's just pull this stuff right now. Let's make it work right now. So that's the end of my presentation. And I guess you can take my screen away.